The book of Leviticus is the third book of the Torah, Pentateuch, and of the Old Testament, also known as the third book of Moses. Many hypotheses put forward by scholars regarding its origin agree that it developed over a long period of time, reaching its current form during the Persian period, from 538 to 332 before Christ, although this is disputed. Most of its chapters, 1 to 7, 11 to 27, consist of God's instructions to Moses, which God tells the prophet to repeat to the Israelites. This occurs in the story of the Exodus of the Israelites after they leave Egypt and reach Mount Sinai, Exodus 19 verse 1. The book of Exodus tells how Moses leads the Israelites in building the tabernacle, Exodus 35 to 40, with God's instructions, Exodus 25 to 31. In the book of Leviticus, God tells the Israelites and their priests, Aaron and his sons, how to make offerings in the tabernacle and how to conduct themselves while encamped around the holy sanctuary of the tabernacle. The setting of Leviticus takes place during the month or month and a half between the completion of the tabernacle, Exodus 40 verse 17, and the Israelites' departure from Sinai, Numbers 1:1, 10-11. The instructions of Leviticus emphasize ritual, legal, and moral practices rather than beliefs. However, they reflect the worldview of the creation story in Genesis 1, that God desires to dwell with people. The book teaches that faithful performance of the sanctuary rituals can make this possible, as long as people avoid sin and impurity whenever possible. The rituals, especially the sin and guilt offerings, provide a means of obtaining forgiveness for sins, Leviticus 4 to 5, and cleansing from impurity, Leviticus 11 to 16, so that God can continue to dwell in the tabernacle among people. Most scholars have concluded that the Pentateuch reached its final form during the Persian period, 538 to 332 before Christ. However, Leviticus had a long period of growth before it reached this form. The entire body of Leviticus is priestly literature. Most scholars see chapters 1 to 16 and 17 to 26, the priestly code, as the work of two related schools, but while the material on holiness uses the same technical terms as the priestly code, it expands their meaning from purely ritual to theological and moral, making the ritual of the priestly code a model for Israel's relationship with Yahweh, as the tabernacle, which is separated from impurity, becomes holy by Yahweh's presence, so he will dwell among Israel when Israel is purified, made holy, and separated from other nations. The ritual instructions in the priestly code clearly originated with priests giving instructions and answering questions about ritual matters. The Holiness Code, or H, was a separate document that later became part of Leviticus, but it seems better to think of the Holiness authors as editors who worked with the priestly code and actually created Leviticus as it is preserved today. Many scholars have argued that the rituals of Leviticus have theological implications regarding Israel's relationship with its God. Jacob Milgrom was particularly influential in promoting this view. He argued that the priestly regulations in Leviticus express a rational system of theological thought. The writers expected them to be put into practice in the Israelite temple, so that the rituals would express both this theology and an ethical concern for the poor. Milgrom also argues that the book's purity regulations, chapters 11 to 15, have a basis in ethical thought. Many other interpreters have followed Milgrom in examining the theological and ethical implications of the regulations of Leviticus, for example, Marx, Ballantyne, although some have questioned how systematic they really are. Ritual is therefore not a series of actions undertaken for their own sake, but a means of maintaining the relationship between God, the world, and humanity. The primary function of the priests is service at the altar, and only the sons of Aaron are priests in the full sense of the word. Ezekiel also distinguishes between altar priests and lower Levites, but in Ezekiel the altar priests are sons of Zadok rather than sons of Aaron. Many scholars see this as a remnant of infighting between different priestly factions during the First Temple period, finding a Second Temple resolution in a hierarchy of Aaronite altar priests and lower-level Levites, including singers, gatekeepers, and the like. In chapter 10, God kills Nadab and Abihu, Aaron's eldest sons, for offering strange fire. Aaron has two remaining sons. Commentators have read various messages into the incident, a reflection of infighting between priestly factions in the post-exilic period, Gerstenberger, or a warning against offering fire outside the temple, where there might be a risk of invoking foreign gods, Milgrom. In any case, there was defilement of the sanctuary by the bodies of the two dead priests, which leads to the next theme, holiness. Ritual purity is essential for an Israelite to approach Yahweh and remain part of the community. Uncleanness threatens holiness. Chapters 11 to 15 examine the various causes of impurity and describe the rituals that will restore purity. One is to maintain purity by observing the rules of sexual behavior, family relations, land ownership, worship, sacrifices, and the observance of holy days. Yahweh dwells with Israel in the tabernacle. All priestly ritual focuses on Yahweh and the construction and maintenance of a holy space, but sin generates impurity, as do everyday events such as childbirth and menstruation. Impurity defiles the holy dwelling. The lack of ritual purification of the holy space can lead to God's departure, which would be disastrous. In chapter 13, God instructed Moses and Aaron on how to recognize infectious diseases and deal with them accordingly. Translators and interpreters of the Hebrew Bible in various languages have never reached a consensus regarding these infectious diseases or Zaharat, and the translation and interpretation of the scriptures are not known for certain. The most common translation is that these infectious diseases were leprosy. However, what is described in chapter 13 does not represent a typical manifestation of leprosy. Modern dermatology indicates that many of the infectious diseases in chapter 13 were likely dermatophytoses, a group of highly contagious skin diseases. The infectious disease of the chin described in verses 29 to 37 appears to be tinea barbae in men or tinea facea in women. The infectious disease described in verses 29 to 37, as leading to hair loss and eventual baldness, appears to be tinea capitis, favus. Verses 1 to 17 appear to describe tinea corporis. The Hebrew word bohak in verses 38 to 39 is translated eteta, or freckles, probably because the translators did not know what it meant at the time and thus mistranslated it. Later translations identify it as vitiligo. However, vitiligo is not an infectious disease. The disease described as self-healing and leaving white patches after infection is probably pityriasis versicolor, tinea versicolor. Teta originally referred to an outbreak that later developed into ringworm-like lesions. Therefore, the common name for tinea pedis, athlete's foot, is Cantley's foot. In addition, verses 18 to 23 describe infections after scalding, and verses 24 to 28 describe infections after burning. Through the sacrifice, the priest atones for sin and the sacrificer is forgiven, but only if Yahweh accepts the sacrifice. Atonement rituals involve the pouring or sprinkling of blood as a symbol of the life of the sacrifice, the blood has the power to blot out or absorb sin. The division of the book into two parts structurally reflects the role of atonement. Chapters 1 to 16 call for the establishment of the institution of atonement, and chapters 17 to 27 call for the redeemed community to live in holiness. The consistent theme of chapters 17 to 26 is the repetition of the phrase, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." Holiness in ancient Israel and the Hebrew Bible had a different meaning than in modern usage. It could be seen as the essence of Yahweh, an invisible but physical and potentially dangerous force. Specific objects or even days may be holy, but they derive their holiness from being associated with Yahweh. The seventh day, the tabernacle, and the priests derive their holiness from him. As a result, Israel had to maintain its own holiness in order to live safely next to God. The need for holiness is for the possession of the promised land, Canaan, where the Jews would become a holy people. "You shall not do as the people of the land of Egypt do, where you lived, and you shall not do as the people of the land of Canaan do, where I am bringing you. You shall do my commandments and keep my statutes. I am the Lord your God." Leviticus 18 verse 3. Leviticus, as part of the Torah, became the law book of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, as well as of the Samaritan Temple. Its influence is evident among the Dead Sea Scrolls, which include fragments of 17 manuscripts of Leviticus, dating from the 3rd to 1st centuries before Christ. Many other Qumran scrolls quote the book, notably the Temple Scroll and for QMMT. Jews and Christians have not observed Leviticus instructions for animal sacrifice since the 1st century after Christ, after the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in 70 after Christ. With no longer a temple in which to offer animal sacrifices, Judaism turned to prayer and Torah study, which eventually gave rise to Rabbinic Judaism. Nevertheless, Leviticus is a major source of Jewish law and is traditionally the first book taught to children in the rabbinical education system. There are two main midrashim in Leviticus, the Halakhic, Sifra, and the more Agadic, Vayikra Rabbah. The New Testament, especially the Epistle to the Hebrews, uses ideas and imagery from Leviticus to describe Jesus as the high priest who offers his own blood as a sacrifice for sin. Consequently, Christians do not make animal sacrifices either, because as Gordon Wenham summarized, with the death of Christ the only sufficient burnt offering was offered once for all, and therefore the animal sacrifices that foreshadowed Christ's sacrifice were obsolete. Christians generally hold that the New Testament supersedes the ritual laws of the Old Testament, which included some of the rules in Leviticus. Christians therefore generally do not follow the rules of Leviticus regarding the purity of food and agriculture. However, Christian teachings differ as to where to draw the line between ritual and moral regulations. In homilies on Leviticus, the 3rd century theologian Origen expounds the qualities of priests as models for Christians to be perfect in all things, strict, wise, and to examine themselves individually, to forgive sins, and to convert sinners, by word and by teaching. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the Moses Film channel and give the video a thumbs up in support.